You're listening to Precinct 444, a podcast network from the National Law Enforcement Museum. Today we're bringing you an episode from Icons, where listeners are introduced to incredible people working within the law enforcement community who have made a profound impact in our world. These one-on-one interviews provide insight into their lives and careers so we can better understand their challenges and recognize their bravery, commitment, and sacrifice. On this episode of Icons, Thomas is joined by Ganesha Martin, a public safety and community relations advocate. Ganesha quickly rose to prominence in the Baltimore City Police Department through the mayor's office and went on to develop strategies and procedures to improve relationships between public safety and communities through a variety of strategies and legislative plans. From these successes, she has received numerous accolades, including IACP's 40 Under 40, and was selected to travel to Nairobi, Kenya to share community policing strategies during the Convening on Civilian Police Reform by Open Societies Foundation. Ganesha's thoughts on women in leadership. If they were put in positions to affect and influence culture, we would be in a place where we would have more trust with our community. And now for Icons, featuring Ganesha Martin, center of the wheel.
Thank you so much, Ganesha, for being here with us today. It is a really great opportunity for us to have a chance to sit down and talk and share more about your story and your experience working within law enforcement.
Yeah, it's my pleasure to be here. I'm so happy that you're doing something like this because so often folks want to hear about some of the things that just can't get captured in sound bites. So super excited to be here with you.
Good. Well, thank you. And I wanted to start. I had a moment. I was at home a couple weeks ago, and I was watching the HBO series We Own the City. And, I'm like, I like the show, and I'm familiar with Baltimore, so I'm like, oh, yeah. And, and then all of a sudden I hear a character refer to Ganesha Martin.
Yeah.
And I pressed pause, and I rewound it. And I was like, I think I just heard the name of the person that I'm going to be interviewing in a couple weeks. And so I played it again. And sure enough, he said Ganesha Martin. So I know there's a story there. And it was you, correct?
Yeah,
right?
It was. Yeah. And it's funny, too. I just remembered this, that, it was an event here at the museum. And I introduced myself to, a couple of, I think it was officers from California. And they were like, Baltimore, we own this city. Are you in? We own this city. And so then, as soon as I said, they wanted to take pictures and all this sort of stuff. So, and I was getting a lot of text, when folks were seeing it, they were like, you're famous. And I was like, I don't know that it's famous, but yeah.
All right. Well, we're going to get into that a little bit later. But before we do, I wanted to learn just a little bit more about your background, where you came from, anything about your childhood that might have led you in the direction you're in today.
Yeah, so I don't know what this means, but yesterday a friend of mine sent me a phone number of this guy we're trying to get in contact with, the new AG of Maryland. And I saw that the guy's name was, that he had a 317 area code. And I said, Indy, my hometown. And she's like, how many hometowns do you have? So I was like, born in Indianapolis, raised in Dallas, Texas, and then practiced law in New Mexico. And then by way of New Mexico, came to D.C. and ended up working in Baltimore. So I really do take all of those experiences and apply them at some point in policing across the country. But if I had to say something that was pivotal in my life as a child, that affects me now, is I've always been taller than most kids. And there was just something in me where I didn't like bullies. And so anytime I saw another kid picking on another kid, I generally was bigger than the kid that was picking on that one. So I would kind of intervene. That's kind of how I ended up becoming a lawyer. And even in policing, it's a big part of the work that I do.
Awesome. I have not been to Texas. But I know a lot of people from Texas, and they believe Texas is like the best place on earth?
I have to look. I mean, maybe over a drink we'll talk about the things that Texas could improve upon. There are some things, but I'll tell you, you are raised with this pride that we do it bigger, we do it better in Texas. So, and it doesn't go away. I just stopped using my Texas license plate, which is, I think, illegal, just a couple of years ago because I wanted to always claim the Lone Star State.
Let's talk about becoming a lawyer. Were you initially accepted into the school that you were interested in? What was the process of applying to schools? Which schools were you interested in? What was that experience like? Well,
it's interesting. So I in my family, it was always just pushed. You're going to college. You're going to college. But there was not a lot of background on which college, like going on school visits and what's the culture and all this. Just in my family it was just get to college. And so I really didn't think about it, and I just said, well, I think I can make a lot of money if I get into an Ivy League school. So I mean that was really the basis of it. So I didn't apply to any quote unquote safe schools. I applied to all your top schools, and I was going through a lot at the time. So probably didn't have the best application, but I was working at a law firm, and the head lawyer said, give me all the stuff that you sent to the Ivy Leagues. I think I'd gotten rejected like twice. And to Harvard, if you're listening. Funny story, by the way. I took my little sister right after that rejection to see, she wanted to see Legally Blonde. Yeah. And I was so just pissed watching her get into college, with a bikini or whatever. Yeah. So, so he took all my stuff, and he was on the Board of Regents at Texas Tech. And he gave him all the stuff. And then I got a call 2 weeks later from the dean asking me if I wanted a full ride to Texas Tech Law School. So my brother was running track there, and I ended up going down to Texas Tech.
So where'd you go? Where'd you do your undergrad?
Baylor.
Is that in Texas?
Yes.
Forgive me, Texans.
Don't worry, I slapped him on behalf of all Texans.
And so what was your experience like in law school? Was it kind of a natural fit? Did you feel like this is where I belong and this is what I want to do?
Oh gosh, get out of my head and my emotions. No, I was a straight A student most of my life, just because again, I didn't grow up with a lot, so my idea was education was going to get me to the place that I needed to go. And so I thought, hey, if I just work hard and study hard in law school, the same thing would happen. But it's not what you know necessarily. It's how you apply what you know in law school. So it's like, how do you think about stuff? Plus, it's this system where, I'm forgetting the name, but either way, It causes a lot of stress and pressure. I remember one time being in one of my classes, and all of a sudden you hear this boom, and I looked down the line, and like somebody had fainted, like just the stress of getting called on. Yeah. And you're judged based upon, not like an A to a 100 to a 90 is an A. Like it's based upon like a bell curve or a curve. You're just like, who, you got to step on that other person, for you to. And so it was really, really difficult, for me. Socially, I was like fine. But even though it was Texas, it was Lubbock, Texas, which by the way, tumbleweed is real. It's not just in cartoons. It's not just in Bugs Bunny. Yeah. It was there. I got caught under my car all the time. So, but I just kept studying and persevered. And then there's a joke in law school that the A's work for the B's and the B's work for the people who made C's. So
right. What so reflecting back, and I like to take a little time to talk about areas that people who are listening might be interested in, you know. So, looking at the trajectory of your career and the things that you've been a part of, is there anything in law school that you would have done differently? Are there, moments where you would have focused on one thing and not the other, or gone in a completely different direction?
Well, there's a couple of things that stuck with me through law school. One was an issue of equity. And you could clearly see the people who had lawyers or judges in their families could do better in just acclimating. The other thing that I probably would have done different. So I studied Japanese in Japan for a year in undergrad.
Mm-hmm.
So I planned on being a corporate lawyer. So I did a lot of classes that I thought would take me there. And if I would have ended up being a corporate lawyer, I would have been very unhappy because I am not a kind of, no offense to you guys, but a paper pusher or that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So what I tell most people who ask me about law school now, first of all, I say I only recommend law school to people I don't like. But if you're going to go, then make sure you do a lot of internships or talk to people in the field that you think you want to be in. I also had decided I might want to be a divorce lawyer after I got out because my parents were divorced. That was way too emotional for me. I was way too connected to it. So I just always say talk to a lot of different lawyers to see what their actual day in the life is.
Yeah. That's good advice.
Yeah.
So then what was the work you were initially doing after law school? You said New Mexico? Right?
Yeah. So I started practicing in Texas. And the firm that I worked for in Texas, I wanted to expand into New Mexico, civil litigation. It was a plaintiff's firm, so juries were much more progressive and open in New Mexico. So went out there to open our branch office in Albuquerque, and then eventually took over another branch in Las Cruces. And so I ran both of those branches of our law firm for about 6 years.
Mm-hmm. So the firm wanted to expand into that area because why?
Because of tort reform. So tort reform in Texas, literally you could, I always give this example. You could have a doctor walk in high on coke, take your heart out when he was supposed to, operate on your toe. And the most a family was going to get was $250,000, period, that sort of thing. So, so Texas was very conservative about civil litigation. And so this firm wanted to expand into a place where juries were not as conservative and would give larger verdicts. And so New Mexico, particularly Albuquerque, is very progressive in that way, and Santa Fe. Yeah.
So then if you were in Texas, you were still bound by those rules, right? Or those limitations.
Yep.
Right. But this just opened another opportunity.
Yeah, because when you go to, so when you're looking at legal cases, you first of all want to look at the law, and the laws usually are passed by the legislature, which, usually reflect whether it's conservative or, progressive or whatever it is. So that's what's going to apply in court a lot of times. And then your juries, what are your juries going to look like? The voting folks there. So you're going to pull a certain jury pool in Texas, and you're going to pull a certain jury pool in Albuquerque. And for the type of law we were working on, Albuquerque and Santa Fe were just much more. You're gonna get more for your clients in those jurisdictions. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So then, what brought you from there to DC or to Baltimore?
Yeah. So I really was missing the city. New Mexico. Is very. I always say mañana, like there is no rush, and so I'm kind of like a fast-paced person. I really loved it, though. It slowed me down. I love the mountains, good food, but I was ready to get back to a city. My brother was in D.C., so I had saved up enough money to not have to work for a year. I was kind of thinking about a different type of area of law that I wanted to go into, looking at public interest law, international law, that sort of thing. And it was quite random, if you will. My godmother gave me the cards of several attorneys that she met at a party. And the first attorney that I called was at a boutique firm in Baltimore. So my first time I went to Baltimore, I met her for coffee, and we're sitting there having coffee, and somebody walks in, and they're talking about the inauguration of the mayor the night before. I have no idea who they're talking about, completely brand new to Baltimore. And this guy looks at me, and he's like, he asked me a little bit about myself, and he's like, I think you should work for the mayor. And I'm like, I don't know the mayor. I'm going to Italy. I'll see you guys when I get back. He's like, no, I think you'd be perfect for this role. So, long story short, that's how I ended up in Baltimore.
Yeah. What were your first impressions of Baltimore?
You know what? People say that Baltimore is like a northern southern city, and it's very true. I always say I live a bi-coastal life between DC and Baltimore, and so I know, right? Yeah, and so the people are just very open, and I don't know. They always keep you laughing. One of the things that I thought about was the mayor. I asked her, what is Charm City? Like, what does that mean? And she goes, oh, you'll figure out. And it's really hard to describe, but it is something that you'll figure out. The other thing I say about Baltimore, it's like where I grew up. Like I saw real problems. Like where I grew up, people didn't talk about murder every day. The poverty was not, you go into schools and you can't drink the water because of lead poisoning. And there were many times in Baltimore City where I was like, are we really in America? Like, I didn't even know food deserts. I never even heard of food deserts. So it's one of those things where I love Baltimore because I think it's beautiful and resilient. But at the same time, it has had a lot of disinvestment and a lot of neglect. And so there's a lot of pain there as well.
Where did you live in Baltimore when you worked there, or live in that area?
No, I commuted every day.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I lived there for a year in Mount Vernon, and
that's a
Yeah.
cool place. Yeah, it's a cool place to live.
Yeah, it's a great city.
Yeah.
So I'm excited that a lot of our conversation today will be about Baltimore and your role there. So what was your first role?
So my first role was special assistant, actually, and you Google that and it'll tell you a million things. It really depends. But so for me, it ended up being like literally the best job of my life because what would happen is the mayor's EPU, so, her protection unit would pick me up in the black SUV. We go pick her up. And then I would be with her from the morning till we dropped her off. So if we were going to a homicide scene, we were going to a sinkhole, we were going to an opening of a new school, we were going to the groundbreaking of, a senior citizen's home. We were meeting, coming up to DC to meet with, President Obama or Nancy Pelosi or, Congressman Cummings, or we were dealing with a Johns Hopkins president, or, for a person who was brand new to Baltimore, I got to meet and greet and like everybody. And so it was great. It was a great experience for me. It was really hard for me to leave that role, but they were paying me what I used to pay in taxes as a lawyer. Yeah. So luckily I had that money that I'd saved up, but eventually I took the bar so that I could practice law in Maryland. I had every intention to be a lawyer in Maryland.
And is that what happened next? Where did you go after the special assistant position?
So I studied for the bar in Maryland, and I passed it. And as I began to look for jobs, I was offered the opportunity to be assistant deputy mayor of public safety and emergency management, where I oversaw 6 agencies, one of which was police. And speaking of TV shows, I decided, having not been from Baltimore, that I was going to watch The Wire to help me get prepared for my new role as assistant deputy mayor. That was a bad decision. It was like a bad decision. Right. The first episode, the IA lieutenant, came on the scene where they blinded a 14-year-old. Everybody was lying. Like, I was just like, okay, I can't, I can't watch this.
No. So let's, I want to talk about the Bureau of Community Affairs. Can you talk more about that project?
Yeah. So when I first I was assistant deputy mayor of public safety. And then during that time, the mayor brought in a police commissioner from California. And so at that time, about a year into his tenure, I was asked to go over to be his chief of staff. So I went over to the police department to be the chief of staff. So this is my first entree into policing from the inside. And we were really focused on proactive reforms. And so I was doing that work. And then 2015 came. We started seeing Ferguson, all of the protests across the country. And our Maryland General Assembly said that they were going to pass police reform legislation. And so the commissioner asked me to go up and make sure that anything that was passed was actually helpful, not harmful. And it was there that I was able to engage with a lot of activists. And I told the commissioner, I said, the community doesn't dislike the police. They hate the police. And so as the chief of staff, when I come back after legislative session, I can't just focus on all the fires that are happening in the police department. I need to focus on this relationship with the community and police. And so I was granted the permission to create this new Bureau of Community Engagement, where my focus was going to be on the relationship between police and community. I also oversaw legislative affairs, and then I oversaw media relations along with that. Once I got permission for that to happen, Freddie Gray died the next day.
I'm going to go back for 1 second. When you referred to the legislative reforms, was that specific to Baltimore or Maryland as a state? And
Maryland as a state, but Baltimore is always the focus. And at that particular time, they were focusing on the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, which is a very strong law that protected police in a lot of different ways. And Maryland had the oldest and the strongest in the country. And so that legislative session, they were focused on dismantling that. So that they could get access to police personnel records, disciplinary records, all these different sorts of things. They lost that battle, that legislative session, but they just won that last session or 2 sessions ago. They were able to dismantle the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights.
Did they put anything in its place, another version?
So that's kind of a controversy, if you will, right now. They're still working to put something in place. And some folks fear that, that gap has left it open for people to kind of fill it however they want to. Right. But yeah, they're still kind of putting things together right now.
So with the Bureau of Community Engagement, how does a bureau take place kind of within the hierarchy of, city agencies or departments? Were you granted a budget? How does that take shape?
So this was a bureau within the police department. So the way the police department, at least in Baltimore, was set up is that you had the commissioner as the top person, and then you had 3 deputy commissioners, and then you had the equivalent of a colonel or a chief, which is what I was. So you just get essentially permission from the commissioner to create a new bureau, which I did, and started working towards staffing that bureau. But with, I'm sure we'll talk about this, but with the death of Freddie Gray, everything changed. And so then my efforts were focused elsewhere. But yeah, when you're trying to build something new in the police department, if it was a agency, you'd have to get the city council to pass it. Actually, in Maryland, you would have had to get the legislator to pass it, because until recently, it was just voted during this last election. Baltimore City was still an agency of the state. This goes back to history, where there were kind of these political coups, and they put the police department underneath the state so that the police department couldn't help unseat the mayor. All this time ago in history. But anyway, so now it's under city control again, and so you would ask for a budget. You would then have to create positions, which can be very painful in government. Then you have to get those positions funded, put it out, and sometimes you would, hire from within with police officers or civilians, and then you would be able to get some positions that would come in from the outside.
And it would be staffed by police officers?
For the Bureau for the Bureau of Community Engagement, I would want both. I would want some police officers, but then I would also want some civilians.
Is that I know things got redirected after the death of Freddie Gray, but is that department still exists?
It does.
Oh, good.
It doesn't exist in the exact same format, but it does exist. It became part of the consent decree, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But.
Okay. Was there any models that you were looking at as you were designing that, or was that your vision? How were you thinking about the Bureau of Community Affairs?
Yeah, what I really did was I went to the police and said, "What do you need?" I also went to the community and said, "What do you need?" And so one of the things that, I found to be important is that, first of all, you have to have it written down. What is your plan? One of the things that happens in police departments across the country, still does, is you get a community engagement office. There's like 5 officers. They do all the community engagement work. The community loves them. And then the rest of the officers, don't have that good relationship because they feel like it's up to that small group of people. No, community engagement and community policing, which I don't really like that term, is for everybody. So I'll give you a perfect example. So like if you have a homicide scene, and you have the tape up and people are coming home, right? How you treat them when you tell them, "Ma'am, if you don't mind, if you'll give us maybe 30 more minutes, the ambulance is on the way," and blah, 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 versus "back up, get in your place," right? I mean, it's just 2 different, environments. And so, and one of the things I always say is, okay, if you were that rude officer at the homicide scene, when the detectives come back to ask that community member, "What did you see?"
Right.
They're not opening the door. They're shutting the door in your face. They may even be cussing you out. And it had nothing to do with that detective. And now that detective can't close a homicide case. So, so write it down. What is everybody's role in community engagement? And then track it and make sure that everybody's doing what we said we were going to do, both police and community. We ended up putting together a community ComStat, where the same way you talk about your crime statistics, we talk about our community statistics.
So then it was a little bit, sounds like it's a little bit different than than engaging members of the community only, but also a training opportunity or learning opportunity for officers themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that at Major City Chiefs twice now, are the annual convening, they've had Target, Wells Fargo, I may be getting the companies wrong, but they've had people there to talk about customer service. I mean, that's literally what you're supposed to be doing when you're engaging with folks. And we've, had training around procedural justice and all those sorts of things. But yeah, the community, in my opinion, the community engagement bureau should be multifaceted. It should have some officers who are focused on certain certain problem solving issues with the community, maybe events, but you should also have training and be able to lead the way for everybody in the department to know their role and to make sure that they have what they need to actually do the things that we're asking them to do in the plan.
So in the example of an officer kind of getting aggressive with a neighbor, somebody coming home from work, where do you think that comes from? Is it a frustration that, it's kind of underlying within their work, or is there just historically, that type of interaction?
Yeah, I think it's a multitude of things. Sometimes just on your basic level, there's some people who should not have a gun and a badge. They should not. And so, but then beyond that, particularly recently, but certainly for a while, you have police districts or police squads that are going out where they would normally have 24 people, 30 people. Mm-hmm. They're having 4, 5, 6 people. So what does that do? First of all, you're stressed, you're worried. If I drop a code where I need backup, because is somebody going to be able to come for me? Mm-hmm. Number one. Number two, you're going call to call. Sometimes you don't get to eat. Sometimes you don't get to pee. Yep. And then you have officers being called because kids aren't doing their homework. From like things like that to somebody's killed a baby. Mm-hmm. You're seeing the worst of people. And just think about this. You're doing this every day. Mm-hmm. Like you get up in the morning to go and see and see people dying or dead or, all sorts of things like that. And I do not think that as a profession we've done what we should for intervention, mental health and wellness interventions. For a very long time, it was a bad stigma for even asking for help because you're supposed to power through it, but you're human. So you can only power through so much. So people turn to alcohol, people turn to drugs, and those sorts of things. And then, going back to what you were saying, yes, there is, which has just come to a crescendo in a lot of places, there is a very tense relationship. There are some places where police pull up and get out of their vehicles and there's 10, 20 cameras on them. There's people spitting at them. Mm-hmm. There's people calling them names, all these sorts of things. And so when you are an officer who might have joined the force to actually do good in your community, and, you're called a racist, you're called all these things, and you literally have not done anything. There maybe somebody else did mm-hmm. something. That's another piece of it. There are officers that do things that they shouldn't get away with, but they do get away with. And so then that makes good officers, leery of the system. Mm-hmm. So you have a whole bunch of dynamics. The other thing that happens in police departments, just like other businesses, is the cool kids versus the not cool kids. Are you cool with the commissioner? Are you cool with the assistant chiefs? The cliques. Are you getting the prime assignments? Like, do you get to be a homicide detective? Are promotions fair? So you have a lot of these things. And just like our teachers, police are not paid well, which is just ridiculous. We have folks in our society doing some of the toughest jobs and we're paying them the least amount of money. So you have all those different things going on. And I think they can crop up at any time. Yeah. So you have all that, and then you're talking to them about, customer service, and I'm sure the eye roll. Well, what's funny? You're absolutely right. Well, what's funny too is there was one time where I was going around to the districts in Baltimore, and I walked in. I was talking to the community at the districts, and I walked in, and literally there were chairs and with the cushion hanging out, like it looked like a bear had just tore it apart. So I look at the major and I was like, really, Major, this is where the police come and sit before roll call, where we want them to be officer friendly. This is where we invite the community. And he looked at me so dejected and he said, ma'am, who would I ask? And that stuck with me because we ask broken people to go help broken people. When you do not treat a person, right, you treat them like a widget, you don't take care of them with basic stuff. If he would have asked for chairs, he probably would have got ripped. Like, people are getting murdered. What's your closure rate? What's this and that and the third? And so I just went and I ripped those chairs out and I brought him new chairs. And so, yeah, you ask somebody who literally, you can go into districts. There's people that are wrapped in blankets because the windows don't close all the way during the winter. There's rats running around. There's bathrooms that don't work.
In the departments.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, it's sad when I do police reform across the country and I walk into police departments and I don't see, like, shingles missing and, all this kind of like, oh, wow, you got a nice place here, know?
Yeah.
Yeah, all of that is difficult as a human being in any position, but certainly being a police officer. Yeah. And we ask them to be officer friendly. And, you can imagine some of the responses to that.
Right. So I do want to talk about the impact of the death of Freddie Gray on your initiative. Terrible timing, I can imagine. So what was that impact? What changed and how did your role change?
Yeah. I don't think it's, well, the death of Freddie Gray ripped the city apart. I mean, literally. I still remember the day we were in the watch center, and we'd prepared for all sorts of eventualities. We knew people were coming from outside of the city, that had been in other cities, probably intent to do damage, and things were winding down. We were actually just kind of about to disperse, and then all of a sudden, it just went crazy. We were getting calls from Oriole Stadium, people scared inside. The calls were going crazy. You could hear yelling, you could hear screaming, all of these things. And so it ripped the city apart, but it also, in a sense, ripped a Band-Aid off of some, because everything wasn't okay, right? There was major problems, but that made things raw, and it made it also made it opportunistic for people to to capitalize on those divides, and which made things worse. And then it just brought a lot of things to the forefront. People looked at Freddie Gray's life, like where he lived, where he grew up, what were things that could have been done, beforehand. Our prosecutor, became a national figure by prosecuting police officers for murder. That was a big deal in the police department, which some argue caused depolicing. And we've had record homicide rates ever since. So you had a lot going on. You had people wanting to come together and have conversations about what we could do. But a lot of people who are just fed up and saying, F it. We're tired of all this. We need some major change. So
is depolicing police leaving?
Depolicing or police, have you ever heard of like the blue cold or the cold blue flu? So it's police officers who are not engaging. They might just sit in their cars. Yeah.
Right.
But they'll see maybe a drug deal going on right in front of them and not necessarily do anything about it because they're like, I'm not getting arrested and going to jail, for doing my job.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So then how did your initiative change?
So it just intensified. So one of the things that I did was I started working with the Baltimore Community Mediation Center, which all these years later, I've just become the chair of their board, and hadn't heard of them before that time. But we started meeting every week police and community for about 2 hours. And it started out very cordial. People were trying to be cordial. But I remember one day I got a call and I walked out and I walked back in and the energy had changed. And this guy starts yelling at me, "You ain't got no power. You ain't got no power. Y'all ain't going to do nothing to change." And I remember sitting there and a tear started rolling down my eye. And he comes up to me afterwards and he goes, "Man, I didn't even know you cared." And I said, "More than you know." And from that point forward, the group really kind of coalesced in a different way. And it's funny, that same guy, he's a community guy. He called me like 2 weeks ago asking me a question about something, and we get off the phone now saying, "I love you." So, yeah. But one of the things that was beautiful about that time was, the police officers that were there, they were patrolling in the same area that Freddie Gray was born and raised and lost his life. And there was a day that they came up on some young people, and they said to the young people, they called up Marvin. That's the guy's name. They called up Marvin. They're like, "Marvin, because he has a youth program. We don't want to arrest these kids. Can we bring them to you?" He's like, "Yeah." So when they kind of talked about that in front of the whole group, the group was like, "Man, can we make this a program? Like, can we make this a diversion program?" So we really worked hard to get that up and going. So I would just say that the efforts just really intensified. I had to be in the community. We had to be very intentional about how to really start building relationships between the community and the police.
What were some of the steps that you took to get those people in the room?
It depends. So there was a lot of people who wanted to be in the room, and wanted to have this conversation. But there were some police who were worried about just kind of getting beat up on, and just not even knowing the right thing to say. So I would do a lot of pre-work. I would talk to the officers before they come in the room. I would talk to the community, try to get them kind of on an equal playing field. But there were times where the community was like, "Nope, I don't want to talk to them." Also, there were times where the community, if they would come and meet with me at the police department, they would come in the back door. There was one situation that was really eye-opening to me. There was a man who came to meet with me, and he said he needed to use the bathroom, and I said, sure, go ahead. And he goes, "No, Chief, you need to go with me." Not in the stall, but outside. He was scared to be by himself in the police department. And so it was just things like that really stuck with me, having not grown up there. That, man, this was visceral, both on the police and the community side. So just really showing up. There was one time where I brought community in to talk about the use of force policy, which is very sensitive. And they came in pissed at the police. "Oh, they do this. They curb our young men," which means put them on the curb and make them cross their legs. And whether it's snowing, cold, whatever it is. And so I asked the police, I said, "Why do y'all do that?" And they said, "Well, ma'am, we don't have the dividers in the back of the car, the cages that would keep people from jumping over the car, jumping over the seat or stuff like that." And so when I told the community that, they then wrote a letter to the commissioner and said, "Buy them that equipment." So they came in pissed about something, but once they were educated about why it was happening, then they became part of the solution. So I just always did stuff like that. And 9 times out of 10, there were some people that I eventually realized for their own PR purposes could never agree. Whether it was the union, right, or whether it was an activist, forget about it. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. Y'all go out, be on the periphery or whatever. But everybody who really wants to make a difference, like, there's a seat at the table. Let's talk about it.
And so, how long were you leading that department?
Probably 5 or 6 months because the police commissioner at the time was fired and a new police commissioner came in. And at that time, President Obama's DOJ under Loretta Lynch had initiated a patterns of practice investigation into the police department. And that new police chief asked me to create a new bureau, the Bureau of DOJ Compliance, Accountability, and External Affairs. So the work that I was doing kind of was subsumed into that work because, it's part of the consent decree process. But I then had to set my sights on creating a completely new, another completely new bureau at the police department.
So that's a great transition into questions that I have around the consent decree. Is this a good transition?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, good. So I think the consent decree is interesting because I don't believe a lot of the general public really knows what a consent decree is.
Yeah, that's true.
And even for myself, before coming here to the museum, I didn't know what a consent decree was or what impact that has or anything about it really whatsoever. I don't even know why those two words go together.
Yeah. This is true. I will tell you, and this was a kind of a joke. Sometimes in Baltimore, somebody would say, tell me about that dissent decree.
Right.
And then people were like, yeah, it's a dissent. It's not consent. It's dissent decree.
Right. Yeah. So walk us through, educate us a little bit around a consent decree.
Yeah. So essentially what happens is there's an allegation made by community or there's a very prominent incident that happened. So Ferguson, Breonna Taylor in Louisville. There's an investigation right now in Phoenix. So Baltimore had been being looked at anyway. And the Freddie Gray incident really was the straw that broke the camel's back. So something with your police department happens and the DOJ under federal law has the jurisdiction and ability to come in and do what's called a patterns or practice investigation. And during that investigation, they will ask for ride-alongs with the police department. They will ask for all of your policies. They will ask you to figure out how to dump entire databases. In Baltimore City, there's a lot of stuff that are like our stops were not even in a database. They paid somebody to enter it into the database and then get it. So they interview people in the community. They hold town halls. They interview people in the police department. And so that can take anywhere from a year to 18 months. Once they do that, they come out with a findings report. The findings report is generally very damning. It's just damning. Usually the police department is very unhappy with the findings. But that is what the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division uses to say, we have found indeed a pattern or practice of unconstitutional policing by your police department. And you have two choices here. You can sit down at the table with us and negotiate a remedy of what you're going to do to fix this, or we can go to court and we can litigate. There have been police departments who fought. We were very clear we were not fighting. We needed a consent decree. And so we sat down at the table and negotiated. The negotiations we didn't always see eye to eye, but we sat down and we negotiated. And so the topics for a consent decree can range. So in Baltimore, it went what I call the rooter to the tutor. That may be my Texas. But it was recruitment and retention. It was the academy. It was how we engage with youth. It was how we dealt with people in mental and behavioral health crisis. It was our technology. It literally touched, it was how we did our sexual assault investigations. It literally was everything. I think the consent decree ended up being 300 some odd pages. And so then once you either agree to the document and you say, okay, this is what we'll do to fix it, that document is the consent decree. It's that actual agreement that the police department will fix something.
The department is consenting
to
those changes.
Got
it.
Then, because this is a federal process, there is a federal judge that is overseeing the patterns and practice and the consent decree agreement. And then you have to go out and hire a monitoring team, which there's controversy around that if you want to talk about it. But you go out and you hire a monitoring team, which is a lot of subject matter experts, previous police chiefs, those sorts of things. And so really what you have once you enter into the consent decree process, which can be anywhere from 5 years and beyond, is you have a federal judge who will eventually determine whether you have come into compliance with all of the things you promised to do to get out of the consent decree. You have a monitoring team who's supposed to be there to help you and give you technical assistance and support and report back to the judge, yes, we believe that they've done what they're supposed to do, or no, they haven't. And then you have the DOJ that still remains there. A team is assigned to each city, and they also judge whether they believe that the police department is making efforts to come into compliance. And then eventually you come to a point in a consent decree where you go to the judge and say, Judge, we've done everything. We would like to enter into the time of monitoring, which I'm forgetting the name of it right now, but it's something compliance. I'm forgetting it. But anyway, you then have to prove for 2 years, a year or 2 years, that you can hold all those things that you put in place, which is very difficult. And then you can then eventually ask to be released from your consent decree. And you can get out. There are folks that have done that. I want to say Oakland might be in like its 25th year of a consent decree. I was
going to ask what sounds like with the investigation and then the letter, then implementing all the changes, which depending on the changes sounds like that could take quite a while, especially if you're underfunded, you don't have resources, you haven't had the support.
Yep.
And then to be on, 2-year monitoring sounds like a long time.
It is a long time. And I'll tell you, like in Baltimore, 8th largest police department, the violence that we were having when we started our consent decree, we were still handwritten. There were not computers in cars, and people had computers in cars since the 80s. So one of the first things I fought for was to get computers in cars, because if you don't have the technology to actually prove that you're doing what you're saying you're doing, you're not going to get out of the consent decree.
Right.
So,
yeah. How do you want me to get out of this if I don't have the resources to implement?
Yeah. Which is how a lot of police departments end up in a consent decree anyway, because you're doing the work, you're under-resourced, you're understaffed, people start cutting corners, not doing training the way you need to, not having the best training, and it's like, you fall into disrepair. You're not doing things well, you're not tracking things well, you're not holding people accountable the way you need to, and then something bad happens, and generally if the DOJ comes for you, they usually already know they have enough information to probably get you in a consent decree. Yeah.
So I have a lot of questions about your role and your experience in that consent decree. One, as a civilian, what was that experience like for you? And I guess actually, I should ask first, what was your role within that?
So, as the chief of that bureau, I had a couple of different roles. One was I was the liaison to the Department of Justice. I was the liaison to the mayor's office. I was the representative for the police commissioner in that work. I was a liaison to the community. And I was the liaison to the police, just about all of those things. one of the things that was important to me was it was already difficult to work in Baltimore City as a police officer, just for all the reasons that we talked about, and the violence being, as rampant as it was. And so I kind of got in my basketball mind of like, I'm going to run drills. So how can I like set the police department up so that they know what's coming, so that by the time it comes, they're not like in total shock. And by the time we're about to be judged by the monitoring team and the judge. So I looked at consent decrees across the country. So there had already been consent decrees in New Orleans, Seattle, and LA. And at the time, the COPS office was also doing something called collaborative reform, which they just brought back. It was called consent decree light, which essentially meant they would do kind of the consent decree process. They would send consultants in, they would look at all your systems, they would tell you a report that you needed to fix things, but you weren't in trouble. Like it wasn't the Civil Rights Division filing a lawsuit on you. So they were already there in Baltimore before the DOJ Civil Rights came in to investigate us. So they paid for me to go around the country. And so I saw what Seattle was doing. I knew we didn't have as much money as Seattle, so I probably couldn't be as fancy as them. Then I saw New Orleans, and I said, okay, that's a little bit more like Baltimore. I could take some things from there. I went to LA. They had the great technology, all these things. So I took all those pieces, and I came back, and I had to come up with a plan. And so I started to say, okay, I need civilians because we're going to have our sworn folks still having to do all the other things that they needed to. We need some civilians who know how to do Excel spreadsheets and, all these sorts of things to help them show compliance. So I had to put that together. I had to then go lobby the mayor and her chief of staff to fund that. And matter of fact, this piece that I'm talking about right now is around the time in We Own the City, where the chief is sitting around the table and having to talk to the mayor and talk to her chief of staff. But anyway, so I had to come up with the structure for that bureau. I had to ask them for the money. I also had to start building I had to start lobbying we're going to need a lot of money for technology. We've got to get this technology right. So started talking to the governor's office on crime control and prevention, and started talking to foundations about we are going to have to be able to fund our CIT and our co-responder model for people in mental and behavioral health crisis. So I just took everything in that consent decree and I started planning. I started hiring people. We started moving people around, trying to fix our academy, creating all these things. So my goal was to try to get a lot of stuff going before the DOJ and the monitor came, and then educating. Like to your point earlier, a lot of people had no idea what the consent decree was, still don't know what the consent decree is. So I was trying to get out and educate the community and figure out ways to get them involved. Eventually with consent decrees, every policy that the police department writes, you have to put out for public feedback for at least 30 days. So making sure the community was aware that they could, have a voice in policy, all those sorts of things, interviewing and helping to get a monitoring team. So really, I was kind of like, I guess I would say the spoke in the wheel for just making sure that we moved the work forward.
So it was my question I had about how you prepared for, what to put into place. So you answered that by going around to other cities and looking at other models. But was there anything that in your experience or your education that prepared you for being in this position? Was there, I imagine there's a lot of learning on the job happening.
Yeah. Well, I think that was the thing that made it, helped me to be able to do my job well, was first of all, I looked at everybody as a human being. Even the people who were mad at police and yelling and screaming, I went and said, why? Right? So I had a rule that you could cuss me out the first time you met me. Like if that's what you wanted to do, second or third time, I don't know. But the first time maybe. And then I would, listen to the police. A lot of times nobody listened to them. And so I would go to the human and I'll say, okay, here's the letter of the consent decree. This is the stuff we have to do. But what's the spirit of it? Like, what can I inject in here that's actually going to help the human beings in this process? And that's just kind of who I am naturally. The other thing was, you have a very different view when you've worked inside the police department. And I always put police in two different categories. There are ones that should never have the gun and badge. They tarnish the name and they should be under a jail, not in a jail. And then there are the majority who show up every day wanting to help and trying to do, the best that they can. So I think about those bad cops and what are the systems we can put in to get them out. But then on those officers that show up every day, I think about like how difficult it is to, first of all, show up and your vehicle doesn't work or, the muffler is hanging or you have to write down or share a computer. Like I just start thinking about how hard it is, to do your job. And I was able to see that as the chief of staff, as the legislative affairs person. And so I took the consent decree and then tried to build things in there that would actually help them be able to do their job well. And in my opinion, if they're doing their job well and the community sees and knows that, then that's going to automatically start building the relationship. So having worked in the police department and actually having been over at the mayor's office, it's two different beasts. So understanding kind of the mentality of City Hall and the mentality of police departments, it helped me. And actually working with the community, being there, talking to the community. Like I could sit at my desk and probably have a conversation with all three of those entities in my head and then come up with something like, okay, you all, I thought about all of you all in this, like this, let's now think about how to move this forward and coalition build. So all of those experiences, I go back to what I told you earlier too about hating bullies, and then to a very small degree, being a lawyer helped because I just understood kind of a litigation process. But yeah, all that coming together helped me.
Yeah. Is there a person in your role in the other cities that have had consent decree, or was that a unique idea?
So the way that I built it was the first time that it had been built that way. There were other iterations where you might have like a deputy commissioner who had the compliance unit underneath it. I reported directly to the police commissioner. And it's interesting you asked that question because Baltimore was the last consent decree under President Obama. When Trump took office, him and Sessions did not believe in consent decrees. And so for 4 years, there were no consent decrees. And so when the DOJ under Biden started doing pattern and practice investigations again, a lot of people started calling me and asking me about what I did 4 years before because there was nobody in the interim. So now it's becoming a practice. I think Albuquerque does it. I know that Louisville has set one up. I just talked to Phoenix not too long ago, so they'll probably do something similar. Because one of the things that was always an issue in police departments a lot, quite frankly, is some issue comes up and then you throw police at it. Go fix it. Whether they have training, whether they have the assets, the money, all that sort of stuff. But it's becoming more popular now.
So what you're describing are the states creating their own consent decrees?
Yeah. So a couple of things have happened in the interim. I'll give an example. So Chicago. So Chicago was being investigated under the Obama administration. And then when the Trump administration came in, they stopped the investigation. Well, the people of Chicago didn't want it to just go away. So their AG, right, took over that consent decree process. Recently, I think the state, Colorado, put Aurora under a consent decree. And then in there's another one, I think. Another thing that was happening is a project I'm working on in Milwaukee. It's now in its 5th year. The ACLU, with a couple of plaintiffs sued the police department, and so there's a judge. I'm on the monitoring team, if you will. It's not exactly a monitoring team because it's not a consent decree, but still the team that oversees it, who says they're going to be in compliance. Yeah, so there are a couple of different ways that people started going after police departments when you didn't have the pattern or practice investigation.
And those AG offices were they prepared for that? I mean, was that were they like, oh, you want us to do this? Where usually they handle that.
Yeah, I don't think they were prepared for it, but I think a couple of them said, okay, well, yeah, we're the logical people to do this. And I do think there were some bumps in the road because DOJ Civil Rights just has been doing this forever. And the AGs were new to it. But they stepped up and took the helm. So
I'm curious if within some departments, if they don't have the resources, the technology, or the support, which ultimately leads to some of these incidents on some level, is the consent decree, and do they see it in some ways as an opportunity to get those things?
Not initially. Initially, particularly rank and file and the unions are against consent decrees. There are folks who say, it ties the officers' hands behind their back. They can't really fight crime, all these different things. So I think it depends on how you leverage it. I leveraged the heck out of it, right? So I went to Under Armour. I went to the state. I went to, we ended up with $1 million from the Ford Foundation. I did not sit there, and the Commissioner Davis was very clear. I mean, I took him on a horse and pony show. I had him sitting in front of nonprofit executives and asking for money. So for me, it was intentional that the first thing that came out of our consent decree was something for the rank and file. I wanted them to see you could use it. So that's why I got them the computers and cars. If the first thing was like a use of force policy or a change, which caused a lot of controversy, like a lot of the use of force policies change where just unholstering your gun was a use of force. So people went bananas about that. Because if you get all these uses of force, right, then it could end up being negative towards you. So, I think the smart cities leverage the consent decree to get them what they've always wanted. In our particular case, too, the judge called the mayor over and said, "Look, I want you to know, if you need a Cadillac to come into compliance with the consent decree, you can't go to the lot and buy a Pinto."
Right.
This was literally what he said. So I told him, I said, y'all, it's the time to get us a Cadillac. How can we leverage this? And it does become very expensive. It's expensive to do business the right way, to have policy writers with background, to have appropriate staff who know how to teach scenario-based training and adult-based learning and, all of these and new technology. But if all of our police departments were able to operate in an optimal way, we'd be in a much better place.
Yeah. Well, Baltimore is a beautiful place and they deserve all those things.
I agree. Especially, I always say, and not that our jobs are not important, but the worst thing we're going to do is have a bad PowerPoint. I come in here and sound completely stupid on a podcast. We are not put on a vest, and running towards bullets.
Right.
And even these days, where police officers are becoming targets of, of attacks. And I'm, as you know, we've had a record number of suicides with police officers. So it's a hard job, much like we saw with our healthcare workers. You're doing all this stuff, and you deserve to be taken care of.
Yeah,
we should do better as a society, I have to say.
Yeah, how have things changed there as a result of their consent decree?
So I think that, a lot of the policies are top notch. A lot of people use them as best practices. The training is much better. I think uses of force are down. One of the things that I implemented when I was there, and I hear it's still there, is even when I had a unit that looked at every use of force. And for a while, you don't get in trouble for not documenting everything correctly. You get taught how to fix it. Okay, 5 or 6 times. Okay, you should know better, and now you need to be brought up. But instituting, because in a paramilitary organization, it's usually do what I say and shut up, and that generally had been done because in a scenario where it's an emergency, you don't need your subordinate going back and forth with you. But I think that's part of the problem in the police department. When people don't have a voice, then they become disgruntled, and then who does it get taken out on, right? The community. So, I think they're one of the women that I mentored back in the day is the one that was running the community affairs bureau. So a lot of best practices. They got cameras in the back of their wagons, which is where Freddie Gray died, and there was no footage. So a lot of good things, but they still have a very long way to go.
Yeah. I want to change gears and talk about 30 by 30.
Okay.
You're involved with that initiative, and I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So 30 by 30 is an initiative that started out of the NYU Policing Project. The aim is to have 30% of academy classes with 30% of women by 2030. For over the past 25 years, it's hovered at about 12% of women in policing and less than 1% in leadership. And so Mo McGough and Yvonne Roman, who were the co-founders, came together and said, let's figure out a way to intentionally bring more women. And it was really interesting. This was the time it was happening because the statistics show that women shoot less. They use less excessive force. They problem solve more. So this is what the community was asking for. So if this is what the community is asking for, why don't we, have more women? And so I think we have about 200 agencies that have signed on. A lot of law enforcement, the marshals, I want to say the FBI, CIA maybe. And so a lot of good momentum. We just finished a listening session across the country. We did Baltimore County. We did Texas, Philadelphia, and Colorado, hearing just from women across the country on their different issues and how we can make things better for them.
What do you think if 30 by 30 had started 30 years ago, what would policing look like now?
Well, if it was successful, because I'll tell you, there were women that we tried to get involved in the 30 by 30 movement that were hesitant because they're like, psh, we've done that. We've tried. Nobody wanted to fund us. Nobody would, and so sometimes timing is everything. And I will say the new Bureau of Justice Assistance Director, Carlton Moore, has grabbed this initiative. He had a 2-day convening of folks across DOJ. Merrick Garland came. Vanita Gupta came. All the big dogs came. And he's supporting the salary of Mo to move this thing forward. And so timing is everything. But I would say if this had started 30 years ago and it had the momentum and people were able to stay focused and get the support that they needed, then what they say is 30% is the tipping point of culture. So as long as we had the right women, because I don't want to act like, just because you're a woman, that means you're just going to be this great cop, but if we got quality women in the door, and they were put in positions to affect and influence culture, I do think that we would be in a place where we'd have more trust with our community, and probably less excessive force.
So last time when we spoke, you said when people are angry, they show up. So what was the experience that inspired that?
So that kind of goes back to the consent decree, where we were very focused on creating an environment where the community could show up and be heard, and be a part of the change. And one of the things that happens, there's a phrase, I can't remember what it is, but there's a phrase, kind of like just this kind of, I don't know, lethargy or exhaustion, but once the piss offedness dies down,
quote,
right?
Yeah.
There's
another one. I'm going to add that to the list.
Did we talk about that one in the New York Times? That was
no.
Oh, we might not. Okay,
yeah.
Maybe when we get off the line here.
Okay.
No. But so there's 200 people in a protest, and then 2 people show up to work to get the policy change. And I don't begrudge folks necessarily for that, because it's generally marginalized communities that we want to show up. But these are also folks who don't have appropriate transportation, who don't have childcare, who have all these different jobs.
Right.
And sometimes they're just like, I'm tired of y'all asking us to do work for free. Fix it. Y'all know the problems. But then it becomes also an issue, because then you're creating policy and you're creating all these things without those critical voices at the table. So, when people are pissed, they're showing up to let you know that. But we've got to figure out a way to sustain that engagement so that we can come up with sustainable change.
Yeah, and that's sort of what I was thinking when I was asking you what the process was after the death of Freddie Gray to bring those people, and then in that time, getting them to sustain that participation and to, have that buy-in is challenging.
It is. And I'll even tell you that the diversion program that I mentioned, that was started with the police community conversation, when I was no longer there, it went to the wayside. And then most recently, it's gotten picked back up to continue it and to try to bring it to fruition. So that's always an issue. The other thing that's an issue with sustainability is the political whims, right? You could be hot and heavy on something. That's one of the reasons why consent decree is good, because you've got to keep doing it no matter who the mayor is. But there's some mayors that go full gusto, and then there's some that don't. So
yeah, and I imagine likewise with change in political priorities, leadership changes as well, and it's really incumbent on them to keep people in those positions, because when you lose that momentum, it's very hard to pick back up.
It is. And I'll tell you, one of the things that happened after Commissioner Davis was let go was the person that was put in there was a friend and a darling to some of the political folks. And then that person was indicted 4 months later. And so, I think we've just got to be much more thoughtful sometimes about who we put in those roles and who we keep in those roles. And that's also a huge part of the problem with policing right now is I call police the political football. So take New York as an example. You had pissed off people showing up saying, defund the police, abolish the police. And then violence starts going up. Mm-hmm. And then they literally elect a police officer, mm-hmm. To be their mayor. Mm-hmm. And so what happens inside police departments is, you get a call. I've been there with the commissioner. Blah, blah, blah. Do this. Okay. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir. Okay. Boom. 2 weeks later. Wait, don't do that. Do this. Blah, blah, blah. And what do you think that feels like and looks like to the rank and file? Right. Like, first of all, you tell us to have integrity and you tell us to act a certain way. But we know that you're changing our orders based upon political whims, and what's the police commissioner supposed to do? Right. The mayor's their boss. Mm-hmm. And so right now that's really happening. We just come out of George Floyd and everybody's like, reform. And now, people are saying more police because of violence. Mm-hmm. The public plays a lot bigger role mm-hmm. in what happens with policing than anybody really ever wants to talk about. Mm-hmm.
It would be good for them to know. I mean, I guess that's very true. And I wonder how we get them more engaged so that their calls for change are more constructive and come from a more educated place.
So one thing that's come up, it's a bit, I guess, controversial, this pushback, is pay the community to show up, right? Because everybody else that's in the room is paid. If I'm working for the city, I'm paid for my time. If I'm a consultant, I'm paid for my time.
Interesting.
So, right? So pay the community to show up. Give them an incentive to show up. Some people are like, a better community is their incentive. Yeah, if they actually saw that change. Mm-hmm. Many communities have said, y'all call us together over and over and over again, and nothing changes. So why am I going to keep wasting my time? Either give them something concrete and action, let them see that when they show up, there's a change made in their community, pay them that way, or pay them to show up. Something else that's really, really going big right now, Biden, I think, just put $250 million, wanted to put $50 billion into CVI, so community violence intervention. And, this is a program whereby you pay and employ a living wage and with benefits. So people who have lived the life, some have even been incarcerated, and you pay them as a part of the public safety structure to actually help reduce violence, reduce beefs and stuff like that. So the other kind of piece of that also is this reimagining public safety. So let's pay social workers. Let's pay people who are clinicians to respond to mental and behavioral health crisis calls instead of police. So there's these conversations right now about how do you use civilians or other people to take on some of the police jobs. And so that's one way. That's one way that people are kind of looking, or a couple of ways that people are looking at it.
Before we close, I wanted to talk about going back to We Own This City. So did you contribute to the gun trace task force case in some way, or familiar with it? And then how were you, how did the author of the book know about your role? Were you all connected in some way as well?
So I'd love to take an outsized amount of credit for taking down the GTTF, but all I can really say is that I was there. during the time. The GTTF had been operating in Baltimore Police Department for a while under different names. And if you'll allow me to kind of editorialize here, part of the issue when you in a city and in a police department, all you focus on is murder. And we should focus on people who lose their life. Like that should be priority one. But when you say everybody is judged by the murder, the mayor is judged by the murder rate, the commissioner is judged by the murder rate, then you start allowing people to cut corners. So the GTTF would be the ones that bring in guns, put meat on the table is what we would say. But nobody's asking them exactly how, even though you would hear rumors about. So Commissioner Davis was the one who cooperated with the FBI to actually bring them down. And one of my favorite scenes, which I actually lived in real life, was when the commissioner, I came to his office and we were talking, and he was like, I'll be back. He knew that the FBI was about to arrest them. And he says, I'm going to go stare those MFers in the face. And so he went down there and he wanted to look him in the face and say, yeah, we took you down. We got you out of here. So I can't take too much credit, but that was part of it, and part of the reforms that we were working on to a small degree. And then I forgot your second part of your question.
How the author was dialed in, right? Because your name was in the script for the show.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny too. I knew that because somebody had asked me to try out for some other show. And when the woman got on the call, she goes, I cast you for a show. And I was like, what do you mean you cast me for a show? She's like, this show, We Own the City. We were trying to find you and we couldn't find you. And so they had to cast somebody. Yeah, they had to cast somebody else. A lot of my friends are mad that the woman doesn't look like me, but so Justin Fenton is the author of the book. So Justin Fenton is, how do you describe him? I mean, he's just everywhere. He lives and breathes homicide, police, Baltimore police. He was the Baltimore Sun police beat reporter. Now he's over at this new place that broke off from the Sun, the Banner. But I mean, every time you turn around, Fenton was going to be in your face, asking you questions. He had sources out of the wazoo. And so this was just like, his thing. And, I talked to Justin because of my role at the police department, but he was talking to everybody. So, probably, I mean, and it was also very well known that I was the lead on the consent decree. So that's probably how all that drama went down.
Yeah. Very interesting. So for those who don't know, We Own the City is created by the same group who did The Wire.
David Simon. Yeah.
And it's an excellent show. And I feel like there's been more shows about Baltimore.
I know.
Than any other city. I mean,
know.
Maybe New York, right?
Well, and I used to get really upset about it. Like, give it a break. But I have to tell you, having lived it, it's like made for TV. Like literally, if I came and sat down and had dinner with you and I started telling you stuff, you'd be like, yeah, right. Like this doesn't happen. And if it so. Yeah. And also too, I don't want to take anything away from David Simon. He's a good storyteller, cast great people. I still haven't, though, after that first episode of The Wire that I told you I watched as deputy mayor, I've never watched the rest of it.
You haven't?
Yes. I was about to say, and that's the response I get from everybody. Like, what?
Yeah.
So maybe one day.
Yeah, one day. You have to go on that journey.
Yes, I'll go on that journey.
It's good.
Yeah.
Have you seen The Corner?
Mm-mm.
That was another one. That was before The Wire.
And there's another one, oh gosh, something like Homicide.
Oh, yeah, Life on the Streets.
Life on the Street, homicide. Sure. Yeah. Yes, and I mean, the only... I
had that book on tape.
Did you? I love it. I love it. I love it. That's why you were made for your job.
That's right.
Well, I the only part I had to deal with that was as a chief of staff, there was a fight. So apparently there was a sign there was a building that's now the Pendry Hotel.
Oh yeah. Oh, that's beautiful.
Yes,
Yeah.
I love the Pendry.
Yeah, that's it.
And so, but I guess that was a building that was in that show.
That was used, yeah.
And there was a sign that somebody wanted, and I had to call the person that had it, and like I had to try to negotiate this whole big old thing about this sign. So the other thing, I loved my job because I mean, you just never,
Right.
you never knew like
Yeah.
what was going to happen from day to day to day to day. I literally had to get used to not being texted.
Right. Where'd everybody
every
go?
minute, every minute. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk about Mark 43
Okay.
also and your role there.
Okay.
Talk a little bit about that. How did you come into Mark 43? What are those folks up to?
Yeah. So it's really interesting. Remember when I told you I went around the country to see what folks had done right and not right for the consent decree? I went to Seattle. From one of the places. And Seattle, Kathy O'Toole, an amazing chief. She was the first female chief in Boston. She was in Seattle. She was, she led the IRA GARDA.
Right, that's right.
Yeah, I mean, she's done like a little bit. I just found out she was the superintendent of the state police of Massachusetts. I was like, what have you not, secretary of public safety? And she's done everything. But anyway, so we've become really good friends. But while I was there, she was just bragging about this Mark 43. She was so excited about it. And so it was 3 guys out of Harvard. They had a business class and Harvard. They got in Harvard.
Another Harvard reference.
So they were in a business class, and the professor said you have to help a real client. And so they ended up helping the Massachusetts State Police, and they thought they were going to go in there and do all this cool CSI stuff. And, they were like, it takes us forever to write our reports. And so they kind of went back to the drawing board. And so they decided to come up with the very first and still the only cloud native records management system. So everything in the cloud. And then since then, they've built a CAD in the cloud. And I don't, I'm not a technology person, but I can tell you what the cloud means is you can literally go on your phone and you can, a 911 dispatch can do what they need from their phone for dispatch. You can, your records management. So all of those issues we talked about earlier with technology, right. You can do it right from your phone. And the other thing that's great about it is since it's cloud native, if Atlanta gets an upgrade to the system, then so does Boston, then so does Albuquerque. So one of the things that was painful for me at the police department is if I wanted an upgrade to an already crappy system, it would take years, it would take more money, and so I got to know them well over the years. I followed them. And a couple of years ago, actually just right up the road, we were having dinner. And I said to them, I was like, you guys, you collect data for police departments. I said, do you know the one thing that community always asks me, whether I was at a community meeting for police or for the mayor, where's the data? Where's the information? Right. And so I said, we've got to figure out a way to use that data and to use your systems to help police and community communicate and build sustainable solutions. And so they kind of pondered it. And then right after George Floyd, they called me and said, would you consult with us? I said, sure. And then they eventually created a position, VP of Community Affairs and Public Policy, where literally I work every day with police and community to say, how can we work together to build sustainable solutions. And the funny thing about it too is that the first company or the first department that gave Mark 43 their chance was Kathy Lanier right here in DC. Lucky them that she took, that risk on them. But they built her records management system from the ground up, and have been there since through Newsham and Conti. And so they just continue to build out their product. And I just always want to make sure that what we're doing is helpful to the police as they try to serve the community. And the last thing I'll say is I've been happy that Mark 43 also, asked me to figure out ways to support law enforcement in other ways. So they were their biggest donor to 30 by 30 initially. We held, an event here where we supported the 54th mile. And so really trying to figure out and get beyond kind of the sound bites and say, what can we do to actually help, law enforcement and thereby the communities that they serve.
It's interesting and a really good illustration of when you think you know what a community of people needs, and then when you engage them and you're like, oh, you need help with record keeping, that like never crossed our mind. And why would it? Because you're not a part of that community. And so when you open up that dialogue and you learn about what they truly need, the difference that can make than what some other person assumed.
It absolutely. It makes such a big difference because you give somebody what you think they need and then it doesn't help them. And then you're like, well, we gave you something great. Why haven't you done something different? And a perfect example is when I was working on that diversion program. So we brought in some youth and to talk to them about the program. And so I was, the cop and playing the cop. And so I went up to them and I said, hey, I could arrest you for what you're doing right now, but I'm not going to. You can do this diversion program. And so the first thing the kid said to me is like, what the are you talking about, diversion program? And then the second thing they were like, was like, I would never get in a cop car in my community without you putting the handcuffs on me. Because if I got in there voluntarily, I could never come back. And so if we would have implemented that program, having never talked to the young people, we would have just called it a failure because they would have always said no. It's counterintuitive to say you have to arrest them and then take them down. And there you can talk to them about diversion, but not out there in their community like they're cool with you.
So is that how it happens? How you get them engaged?
Well, so they're still working on it right now.
Yeah.
But hopefully they kept that nugget because, but that still makes it very complicated because guess what's going to happen? The community is going to see cops arresting young kids and they're going to get pissed.
Right.
And so I know, right?
Yeah.
But this is part of why you've got to get in here and have these conversations and the relationships have to be on the ground. Super important.
Yeah. Before we go, I wanted to ask if there was any particular quotes that you love or words of wisdom from your experience, again, thinking about young people or young professionals who are entering into, careers related to law enforcement. I think you've had a really unique experience as a civilian being in really high-ranking leadership roles within law enforcement, within City Hall and working with mayors. And so anything to leave our listeners with?
What comes to me is, if not me, who? If not now, when? I think sometimes we feel like we've got to be, this great thing. I had to go to Harvard. I didn't. And I've been in rooms with presidents. I've been, and with community and all these sorts of things. So, one of the things, and even right now, I keep asking myself, am I doing my highest and best good in policing? Like, what do I need to do? And sometimes you don't know. Sometimes you just got to take a step. And sometimes you feel like, it's such a big problem. How do I solve it all? And if you just say, what is the role I can play? What can I do? All those little steps, if everybody does a little bit, then we, could come together for the greater good. So if not me, who? If not now, when?
Excellent. Thank you so much, Ganesha, for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This has been amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for listening to this edition of Icons, featuring Ganesha Martin, and hosted by Thomas Canavan, the museum's executive director. We hope you found this conversation enlightening and will join us again for another edition of Icons, where we introduce listeners to incredible people working within the law enforcement community who have made a profound impact in our world. These one-on-one interviews provide insight into their lives and careers so we can better understand their challenges and recognize their bravery, commitment, and sacrifice. Please subscribe to Precinct 444 on your favorite podcasting platform to stay connected and to receive our latest content as soon as it drops. We would love to hear from you. Send in your questions, comments, and feedback to precinct444@nleomf.org. You can help us make our content even better. The National Law Enforcement Museum is located at 444 East Street Northwest in Washington, D.C., and is dedicated to telling the story of American law enforcement. We expand and enrich the relationship between law enforcement and the community through educational journeys, immersive exhibitions, and insightful programs. Find us online at lawenforcementmuseum.org and stay tuned for more podcast content from Precinct 444. Until next time, stay safe. We'll see you at the precinct.